You've just committed the perfect murder. Your alibi? It's airtight. Your plan? Went off without a hitch. There's just one problem. A dogged detective, seemingly harmless. He's a slob. He's forgetful. He's always coming around in a rumpled raincoat. But he keeps needling you with questions, hounding you. The more questions he asks, the more you wonder, does he know more than he's letting on? Are you going to get away with your nefarious deed? This is the question that every villain has to ask themselves on the episodes of the TV show Columbo, which we'll be discussing in a 2-part feature this week. But I'm not going to do it alone. And before we get into Columbo suspects, we're going to get into the usual suspects of this podcast, because I am joined by a few people who will be helping me today. Let's start with, which one of you? Let's start with Van Lee. How are you today?
Well, I'm grateful that you didn't start with Kevin Spacey, because that could cause some problems when you're discussing the usual suspects. But I'm doing great. I'm ready to talk some Columbo.
Well, that was more than I wanted to know. Actually, I don't care how you're doing. And we've also got Brian Vaughn. How are you today?
Well, speaking of the usual suspects, we could be talking about Gabriel Byrne, who's also in the usual suspects. I'm fine. I'm going to be better in a few minutes because we're going to be knee-deep in Columbo. That didn't sound exactly how I wanted it to.
Well, you didn't say balls deep, so we're good.
No.
Yeah, we've got a couple episodes we're going to get into. The one that we're starting with today is Season 2, Episode 6, A Stitch in Crime. And a great pun.
These titles are great.
No, somebody put a lot of effort into that, so that was to be commended.
I imagine it's just Peter Falk. He does everything.
I title all the episodes. My wife helps me.
I'm glad you guys brought this up already. There's a whole thing we can get into later where he did want more creative control.
Really?
Project. It didn't happen. It didn't happen, but he wanted it really badly, and they fought a lot to show in him. So yeah, that's the one we're starting with today. And this is a doozy. It's an interesting one. Of course, starring Leonard Nimoy.
Oh, and for listeners out there, you can watch all episodes of Columbo on Peacock. So if you have the subscription, you can do it without commercials. If not, you can just watch it for free with commercials. Either way, you'd just be doing the right thing by watching Columbo.
Yeah, you need to make sure you're watching Columbo instead of what you've been doing, which is not watching Columbo. Because, for instance, I hadn't been, Van hadn't been. We now have, and we can't stop.
Oh, I've watched extra episodes.
As have I. It's been plaguing my brain. I just need just one more thing, and that one more thing is to go watch more Columbo.
Yeah.
As you guys know, I've seen most of the catalog, and I only assigned you guys 2, so I'm very impressed that you went above and beyond in this. I'm very proud. It brings a tear to my eye.
It's true, he's bawling right now.
We want to briefly outline the idea of the show and then work into the idea of the episode, and then we're going to analyze it a little bit. These things were movie length, so it's very difficult to completely recap it as we've been doing in the past.
With our 22-minute sitcoms.
Yeah, and that's what I was laughing about so hard with any of the previous ones is like, we're generating a lot more content than the show itself did.
And a lot better content, probably.
And now it's our turn to be a little more precise and kind of just hone in on the fine points. And if we talked about the entire hour-and-a-half episode, this thing would be probably 4 or 5 hours.
That's true, because we go like an hour talking about a 22-minute show.
Now, ideally, our listeners are so loyal they wouldn't mind, and they might listen to us for 5 hours, but I don't want to do that to them. We'll try to just kind of briefly go over the show, and then we'll discuss our thoughts on it and do like a roundtable form, and we'll just see how it goes. As I mentioned, this one stars Leonard Nimoy, the first one that I picked. Of course, he is, as far as I know, only known for Star Trek. What else did he do, guys? Do you guys know?
I think it was just bit parts in shows like this. I don't think he really had any big vehicles or starring roles or anything. Maybe he did, but it'd be in one-off things because, as you said, he's known for Star Trek. He was typecast.
The bread and butter for sure.
I mean, that made his entire career then. So being a Vulcaner, is that what he was?
Yeah, that's what it was. Now, if to his credit, he seemed to really relish that role. A lot of people who get known for a specific role then will start to hate it. and they hate that fans want him to do this or that with that character. But Leonard Nimoy, for the most part, always did gags with it. He did the Simpsons gag.
Seemed like a likable guy.
He seemed like a likable guy. He seemed like he enjoyed what he was doing and understood the gravitas of the character and why he was so relevant was because of it, and didn't necessarily try to fight it. Now, like I said, that does mean he was typecast, I think, for the most part.
Oh, yeah.
That said, I don't know his catalog, so maybe he wasn't.
Refer to him as Spock when you were watching the episode, and he's not Spock in this episode, believe it or not.
And you know what he is? I'm going to go ahead and say it. Leonard Nimoy is a handsome, good-looking
he really is. I think so, too.
He's a good-looking dude.
His eyes are too small.
I
Is that how the eyes? Is that why they gave him the big ears in Star Trek, to make up for his eyes?
His lack of eyes.
I like the way the idea that it would work that way. Like, as one feature is too small, let's make another one bigger.
I do not like Leonard Nimoy's attractive.
I thought he's a good.
Does that voice do nothing for you?
The voice.
It's a great voice.
It's a great speaking voice. I was captivated.
He did a lot of voice roles, even in one of my favorite game franchises, Civilization, which Van has also played. He did the narrator part for one of them. I think it was 4.
Okay.
I want to say, and yeah, he's great at that stuff. I absolutely respect.
And he did a good job in this episode too as an actor. But no, I
into that. So the basic premise of the show, for those of you who haven't seen it.
Because every episode's the same, right? I've watched 4 now.
General formula is it's a person like Leonard Nimoy, big star in the time period, and this is it. The pilot aired in '68. This episode, I think, was 72. There were
2 pilots, right? This is what I was reading. They released a pilot, which was a movie, or a TV movie.
Yeah, that
did well.
68 yeah.
Then they said, hey, maybe we can do a series of this. Let's do another pilot.
Right.
Which then called...
And that one's actually not on Peacock, weirdly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that the first one on Peacock is not the first episode following the pilot. They might fix that at some point, so that might not be evergreen.
Get your shit in
that
here, NBC.
That's the situation. There's a strange kind of gap there, but... Essentially, we're talking early 70s for the main part of the start of the show. And it went on and on and on, and they had starts and stops. And
there was something called Mrs. Columbo that was made?
All kinds of different things happened over the years.
Her name's Kate.
The ones we'll be talking about, especially this one, is early 70s. And the formula is similar. It's Columbo, Peter Falk, squaring off against a very, very mean murderer who is played usually by a massive star who was in films at the times. TV shows now, they get big names, but back then I don't think that was as common. So it was kind of unusual to have these big names acting right across from Peter Falk.
Well, I guess what they did was, it was part of some Friday night mystery hour or something where they would rotate 4 different shows. So they would have a new episode of Columbo on Friday 1 of the month. Friday 2 of the month was Jake and the Fat Guy, or whatever the other second crime mystery show was. Third was
more casual than Jake and the Fat Man. It's just Jake and the Fat Guy.
But this allowed Columbo in particular, because it was the most successful as well as the other shows, to maybe apply a little more touch and care and attention to it. Otherwise, they would have been filming every couple of days. The schedule would have been rigorous, doing an episode a week, and it probably wouldn't have held the weight that it currently has, or held up as well, because I will say the quality of these episodes...
Top notch.
Yeah.
Some of the cinematography efforts have not aged well, but the acting is usually superb. And the quality overall is fantastic, which is the first thing I noticed when I rewatched it as an adult, because I did see it a lot as a child. My dad had it on a bunch when I was growing up on TV. So I saw the reruns. I grew up watching them, and I thought years after leaving it behind from childhood, this is probably a really campy, stupid thing. And the second I watched one, it was like, no, this is really well done. The production value is incredible. The actors are really good and big names at the time, like I said. Generally what happens in these shows is somebody kills someone and Columbo comes on the scene and saves the day by solving this very difficult to unravel crime. And it goes about it in a slightly different format. But generally speaking, that's the idea of it, is we have an A-lister who murdered somebody and Columbo gets to square off against him and solve it.
And that's where it's different from a lot of these crime shows, in that they are whodunits. Like, what's the Angela Lansbury one I just blanked on the top?
Murder, She Wrote.
Murder, She Wrote, where we see her trying to piece everything together. We don't know who committed the crime. We're guessing along with the detective or mystery novel author in this case.
As they often solve crimes.
Yes. However, with Columbo, it's the opposite. We know who did it rather quickly. We're watching Columbo piece it together and toy with his prey.
It's the adversary. It's all about the psychological part of it, where you don't have any questions about it. You just wonder how Columbo's going to solve it and how that interaction's going to go. And it was, let's face it, this is very much so Columbo versus whoever they chose in this episode. That was the main premise of the show. And it works very well most of the time. And it does in this particular episode, which we have already alluded to, involves Leonard Nimoy. Well, we're going to paint the broad strokes, and then we're going to start to kind of focus a little more on the specifics as we go. General premise of this, though, Spock is an evil surgeon, right?
Typecast, am I right?
He's got
always operating on people.
Okay, let's make fun of Spock some more, guys.
Vulcan death grip.
There are probably a lot of Star Trek fans who would not appreciate this right now, but that's fine. He has a mentor. They're in some sort of research project together, and the details do not matter, don't worry. They are working on it together, and it's going to take longer than Leonard Nimoy, whose name is Dr. Mayfield, by the way. Dr. Barry Mayfield. And we will not refer to him as Leonard Nimoy or Spock anymore. He is now Dr. Barry Mayfield.
Because he slips right into that role. You won't be thinking of him as Spock any longer when you see him as Murderous Barry Mayfield. A name that doesn't sound like a murderer's name, but then also kind of does.
Barry Mayfield sounds like a boxer's name, particularly when you put murderous, like Murderous Barry Mayfield. That's hard to say.
Yeah,
that is going to go up on the marquee to sell your pay-per-view ticket.
I would buy a ticket to that thing.
What happens is, at first, it's pretty simple for him. He's not happy with the fact that he's not going to get the credit, and it's going to take a while for the research project to pan out. So he's just thinking, well, I'm just going to have to kill this guy, and then everything will go the way I want it to.
That's, the logical conclusion.
Of course.
That any sane human being would come to.
Well, he has a very convenient way to do it, because he's very smart. He's very surgeon, and he has to do a heart operation, a heart valve on this guy. And he has a very genius way to kill him. I was actually very impressed with this. This is one of the better ones in terms of execution. We'll discuss another one next time that's a little more in the moment.
A little more
This one's really planned out, and you would never know it was murder. Sometimes they know you're going to know it's murder, but they'll get away with it. So he doesn't need an alibi. Dr. Mayfield does not need an alibi to kill this guy. And he is just going to put in dissolving suture in his heart valve. And even though the operation will look like a success, he will die a few days later, a week later, I think they say it is.
I cannot attest to the medical accuracy of this.
Well, it was the 70s.
There's two types of sutures. Yeah, and it actually looked pretty good, by the way. The surgeon scenes.
Yeah.
I was impressed, minus the lack of blood. But anyway, there were two types of sutures. One, which is the permanent suture, which you would have to remove on your own. And two is the dissolving suture, which I don't know if you guys have had. I've had many stitches.
I have never had a stitch in my life. No.
So they stitch you up, and after a few days, they just dissolve. They fall out.
Right.
And so it's great for if you cut yourself. And you
but
don't
not so much for a heart operation.
Exactly.
That's the general premise here. So it was pretty clever. I mean, as far as if you're going to murder somebody, you have to give Dr. Mayfield some credit, right?
Absolutely. His big trick here is that he dyes the sutures so that they appear to be the same ones as the more permanent sutures, the dissolving ones. And no one else in the operating room is going to notice that because they look like the sutures that would traditionally be used. But that's not, as it turns out, the case because someone is very curious.
It's very fortunate there's a perceptive nurse who is very fond of Dr. Heidemann, wants to protect him, and is just not, she doesn't like Dr. Mayfield, which I wouldn't either. And she doesn't trust him, and
you don't think he's handsome.
His eyes are too small. How is he going to do any surgery with those eyes? So
they must be really good for such a small-eyed man to be such a good surgeon.
She realizes this, picks up on it, and they have a whole ordeal. And this is where the formula does deviate. Typically, there is just the one murder, and Columbo figures it out from there. In this case, this murder that he's planning is foiled by someone else that's not Columbo, before Columbo even comes in the picture. The nurse is a major problem for him, so that becomes his murder victim, actually. And this is a major change. It doesn't usually go this way. So he hits her in the head with a, what is it, like a tire? Yeah.
Less graceful than the first murder he was plotting.
Yeah, well, he didn't have time to plan this one. He didn't know that the nurse, Sharon, was going to call into his game.
Yeah.
Sharon Martin.
Sharon Martin. He challenges her, if you think I did something, why don't you go to police? Calls up a lab. She's like, I've got these sutures. I want to have them analyzed. And he realizes, well, fuck, I'm going to get caught now. So he just finds her in the parking lot and beats her in the head.
Very elegant. And at this point, Dr. Mayfield's very glad that security cameras are not as prevalent as they would later become.
Yeah, most of Columbo gets eliminated with technology.
Yes.
As I'm watching.
Like anything invented before now.
They do get into some cutting edge at the time technology at points, but yes, they
dissolving sutures.
This is where you really learn the depths of the evil that Dr. Mayfield has, because he doesn't stop at beating the nurse in the head. He also steals her key, breaks into her house, plants drugs. He's got this whole plan in mind. And now that he's stuck in this situation, he's thinking on his feet, and you can see he's pretty good at this, even though it's not going to go the way he originally thought. His next plan after killing her and planting the drugs on her is to prime her roommate for information. Do you guys recall that interaction there?
What I recall is being flabbergasted at the forthrightness, is that right, of the roommate.
Yeah, Marcia, the roommate.
She seems awfully naive, doesn't she?
She wants to have sex with Dr. Mayfield.
Well,
very
doctor, and you guys do too, so
sure.
You can relate to that, I guess.
Well, she was just essentially like, oh, Sharon was so great. She was such a giving person. She worked at the children's cancer ward for free.
Yeah, and she's like, I suck.
Yeah, I go to the work physical therapy, or what is it?
Oh, yeah, she says I only get to talk to men under 45 when they want a facelift early or something.
Yep.
That little throwaway line.
Mm-hmm.
She is willing to admit that she's after just the surface level things in life, whereas our dearly departed Sharon was a much more caring person.
She does give him, being naive like she is, she gives him the information that he can use, that she was dating a man named Harry Alexander, and he was a former drug addict who she met in one of her volunteer efforts. So that's all he needs. He's just completely manipulating along the way after his attempted murder and his actual murder. From that point, that's his next target. He's got to prove to Columbo that that's the guy who killed Sharon, and he's out of control at this point. He's lost the entire process that he was going for originally, and he's just trying to cover his tracks. So he has to also kill Harry in a very horrific thing where he, I think, chloroform, and then injects him with
morphine, I'm assuming.
Yeah, the morphine to look like he'd fallen back on, because Columbo talks to him and he doesn't think he did it or anything. So yeah, we've got Dr. Mayfield trying to figure out how to fool Columbo at this point, because Columbo's well on his trail, and we will get into this. But at this point, that's the second person he's killed already. And usually the murderer only does the one, so he's done two. He's trying to do three. You guys have already kind of gotten a sense of how you feel about Dr. Mayfield at this point, right?
Oh, absolutely.
He's pretty cool.
He's super cool and super good at murdering people.
Yeah.
I guess not good enough, but...
Yeah, and he keeps scrambling to the point where he just is murdering additional people and his intended victim is still alive, which I think is the coolest little trick that this show, or of several, that this episode plays, in which his entire goal has still not been accomplished. Dr. Heidemann is still laid up in a hospital bed waiting to get better, he thinks.
And of course, Dr. Mayfield never loses his cool this whole time.
Nope. No, he's Vulcan.
Steadfast. Yeah, he has no emotions because of his home planet being blown up by the Korgs or whatever.
The synthesizers?
Yeah. They attacked. Can you believe it? It sounded great, but it was horrible.
I always knew they had it out for us humans.
In the end, of course, Columbo is just not fooled by any of these red herrings that Dr. Mayfield's trying to throw at him. And it comes to a head when he just doesn't buy any of the other things, and he confronts him. There's a very unusual confrontation, which I will just tell you almost never happens, where Columbo actually blows up at his prime suspect. He never does that.
What's so funny?
Excuse me, Lieutenant. I had to play it as though you were serious. You don't really believe all those foolish things you say, do you?
I believe you killed Sharon Martin, and I believe you're trying to kill Dr. Heidemann.
And this is a thing that struck me as a kid, and my dad and I always laughed about, is how mad he gets at him, because Dr. Mayfield's laughing in his face as he's telling him all the evidence against him, and he just loses his temper, blows up at him, and says, "I think you did it, and I'm going to prove it." And Dr. Mayfield says, "I don't think you can." They're at an impasse at that point. There's no proof of it, even though Columbo's definitely pieced it all together. So a big conclusion comes up, and this is where the gotcha comes in. There's always a gotcha at the end of the episode where Columbo has to almost kind of trick his suspect into revealing himself. He points out, "I think you're trying to kill Dr. Heidelman, so if he does die, we're going to be finding out why he died. If it's something you did, we'll know about it."
Yeah, if there are no sutures in there during the autopsy, they've dissolved. Well, hey, you've just proved me right.
So then what does Dr. Mayfield do?
So Dr. Mayfield, well, first off, we then find out Dr. Heideman's not doing well.
No.
He's in his hospital bed. He's sweaty and gross. He's totally okay with it if Columbo wants to smoke cigars in there, though. He does not give a shit.
1970.
So Dr. Mayfield then has no choice but to erase his evidence by once again cutting open Dr. Heideman and doing this thing upright with the heart valve.
And he poisons him or something. He puts something in his medicine to cause an intense reaction.
That's why he's not doing well at that point. It's like Dr. Mayfield goes into there and he makes it look like there was a reason he had to do another surgery.
Otherwise,
obviously
that would have been admitting murder in a sense, too. Right. Well, I just want to, for funsies, hack this guy back open.
I'm a great surgeon, but let's do another one.
I like to practice.
Another operation. So
He really should have just waited for Heideman to die. The guy is not young.
No.
This is the big reveal of the episode. After all of this happens, and Columbo is watching as he performs the surgery, and has to interrupt it right afterwards because he's looking for the dissolving suture that he's got to remove. That's all this. The linchpin is based on that. If he can find that suture, he can prove Dr. Mayfield's a murderer. We have to figure out how is Dr. Mayfield going to do this operation and get rid of the suture. As it turns out, he does a very clever thing, which I didn't catch, where when he confronts Columbo about interrupting it, he pushes him, stuffs it in the lab coat, and they can't find the suture anywhere until they have their final talk, and Columbo eventually comes to that conclusion. After first admitting that he'd been beaten, right?
Yeah.
He'd been bested at this point by Dr. Mayfield until, of course, he realizes there's no way that Dr. Mayfield would cause a physical confrontation.
Because remember, he's kept his cool through
this whole time. I mean, the only physical confrontations he normally does involve chloroform rags and tire irons.
all getting beamed up.
And occasionally there's a beam up that goes on, yeah.
And one of the very first clues that we have that Columbo would notice that, by the way, it is put in very early in the episode. There's a part where Columbo walks in and Dr. Mayfield is pretending to learn about Sharon's murder, and he is adjusting the clock. Because, of course, he already knows that. It's not a big deal, so he's just doing ordinary things while he's talking about it. But Columbo has a moment where he points out, you must have some kind of focus to be able to do something like that while learning such shocking news.
And I'm no cop, but I saw that scene and I thought, I don't know, I fidget. So if it were me, I'd be fidgeting with what.
See, but he wasn't fidgeting. He was setting it to an exact time.
Explicitly.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
I could see myself doing that.
I definitely understand.
Murderer is what you're admitting.
Yeah, of course.
I definitely understand the concept of like playing with something, picking something up and doing. I do that all the time. I have to have a prop all the time because I'm so uneasy in my own skin. But yeah, he realized how calm and focused he was, and it just didn't add up at the end. So ultimately, he determines Dr. Mayfield has put this suture in Columbo's own lab coat, and there's the gotcha.
And it's they wouldn't check that. He was thinking they would only check
everything else, which they did.
Who worked at the hospital's lab coat.
Right.
They did. They didn't check Columbo's, but Columbo did.
He realized he left the room. The conversation was over, and he came right back in, which he does.
Oh,
he does it a lot.
Just one more thing.
Yeah. So that's the general premise of this show. It is a little convoluted. The next one we'll discuss is more straightforward in some ways. It's just this one is unusual. The killer's failure in having to try to cover his tracks the whole way, that's not common. Columbo's relationship with him was not common, and that's the stuff I want to get on now. So now that we've kind of covered enough of the plot to where people will kind of have an idea, and you can just go ahead and watch along with us if you want to. If you're feeling like we didn't recap it very well. Did you guys have any thoughts on Peter Falk's performance in this at all, or the character itself, like what it established for you since it was the first one we watched?
I have a lot of thoughts.
Let's do it. Let's go around here and figure this out.
Well, I guess let's start out with the basics. Okay, I had never watched Columbo. I don't know that I've ever watched a minute of the show, so I had no real preconceived notion.
You didn't know what you're getting at.
I didn't. What I thought was, I knew he was like blue collar because he's got the coat and the look and everything, but I didn't realize he was just a trash imp who thrived at chaos, because that's essentially what it is. And
How dare you judge him?
It's not judgmental, it's just appropriately labeling. So he's very scraggly and rough around the edges and looks like he just woke up from sleeping in a dumpster for a few days. But he's smart. He's obviously a lot smarter than he lets on.
Exactly.
He's very perceptive and very antagonistic towards whoever.
Yes.
Not always. Just when he thinks it's serving his
It's
investigation.
advantageous to
Yeah.
him. I really enjoyed that, how he needles when he needs to needle to apply pressure.
Yes.
And a lot of the pressure that he applies in this episode to Dr. Mayfield
Ew.
works.
It is
Although
antagonistic.
It arguably
case.
does cause other deaths because he's willing to put the information forward in front of Dr. Mayfield, letting him know what information he's gained already, which makes Dr. Mayfield panic and start doing things like meet up with Sharon Martin's roommate, Marcia, and put the name of Harry Alexander in her brain so that she'll tell the cops, which Columbo is able to figure out immediately. Hey, Harry Alexander, where'd you get that name? And Marcia tells him, oh, yeah, I got it from Dr. Mayfield.
Columbo also does the thing where he kills him with kindness. That's where, I just said
that's the most
antagonistic.
common tactic, actually.
Antagonistic's not the right label.
But
He needles, like you said.
Yeah.
But it's not always a, come on, what's your deal kind of needling. It's, hey, why don't you tell me about this thing?
I happen to know
Nice.
this little item.
He's kind of sweet, to be honest.
yeah. He tries to act clueless and harmless, and it generally works. This is one of the only relationships, or at least one of the worst relationships he has with the murderers in the entire series, where he just flat out ends, like I said, when he loses his shit at him, he doesn't ever do that. And that's one of those things. There's a big prevailing theory that most of everything he does is an act, right? Like it's not, he's just trying to get the information, and you see the real him sometimes. And the real him in that case, he let his guard down, and that's really what he thought of Dr. Mayfield when he slammed the thing down on the desk, and told him, here's what I think happened. And he rarely ever does that, so it's a really special moment in the show that he just completely comes unglued, because he doesn't do that.
Oh, sorry. I'm just a little tired today because I was around in the garbage bin behind Wendy's.
That's
and I fell asleep.
That's the big opening to this thing, which is not common. He comes there tired, unshaven, needing coffee. The first 30 minutes of the episode,
He had a
he
rough
keeps
night.
asking for coffee.
He needs more coffee. He couldn't sleep because his wife was sick. He also enters the scene peeling a boiled egg, which is just incredible.
And this is the thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned that I had never noticed before, is I believe that egg, does he crack it on the murder weapon?
He does.
That might be, that would be, because he comes in on Sharon's death. They show him that, like, there's no fingerprints, and he's like, here, can I see that for a little bit? And he cracks his egg on it. She just got her brains beaten with this thing, and he's eating his breakfast.
There's lots
on
of
it.
proteins in brains, too.
Yeah, I thought that was very, I laughed. I'm not going to say I didn't laugh, but it was a little strange. So, as far as setting the tone for the Columbo character, did you guys get a pretty good sense of him in this?
Certainly.
I also wanted to mention that I thought another thing that he does, he knows Dr. Mayfield's a cold, calculated type, and he knows this all along, which I think is ultimately one of the things that frustrates Columbo. But he also shows an important degree of trust when he goes to ask some more questions of Dr. Mayfield at a house party that Dr. Mayfield is hosting, which is just an awesome.
It's
scene.
Talk a little bit about that too. We'll have to get into.
Yeah.
We've got several more points to go, but for now, let's take a very short break.
So now that we're back, I did want to also discuss how trusting Columbo is at a really key moment in the story. Dr. Mayfield being really cold and calculated, I think he thought he needed to earn that. So Columbo shows up at a house party, an awesome 70s house party.
What a soiree that was.
Yeah, that Mayfield is hosting, and shovels food into his face like there's
I was
zero.
impressed by how much Peter Falk actually ate in that scene.
And jealous, I was, anyway.
What if it had not gone well and they had to reshoot that? I was worried for him because it was like, that was a lot of food, and he really did eat that. A lot of times you can tell they cut away and the actor's not really eating. He was eating that food.
He was shoveling it in his face, and I have a feeling that he didn't get paid for this role. He was just like, yeah,
That was part of the payment.
$50 a week and make sure that we got a spread, and then I'm going to be happy.
Maybe the payment was going to Spock's party.
Yes, exactly. Oh, thank you. I'm such a socialist.
But Columbo's stomach goes awry from eating all this food, and he completely just trusts Dr. Mayfield, who already knows that Columbo's
That's
onto
a
him a
great
little bit,
Yeah.
by saying, hey, do you have anything for this? I feel sick from eating so much food. And he gets presumably some sort of antacid or something from Dr. Mayfield and just pops it in his mouth immediately, which I do think is kind of a character beat of Columbo saying, hey, I'm going to trust you with my health. Maybe I don't suspect you.
And I also think that could be an element of him trying to build fake trust with that character.
Well, yeah, it's not real, but
Right, yeah.
but he knows in reality Dr. Mayfield's going to be on good behavior with him. He wouldn't hurt him, but Dr. Mayfield does not necessarily know that.
Sure.
So just kind of a moment of trying to get Dr. Mayfield to trust him more.
Right, yeah. He's always trying to trick the villains into thinking that he is somehow on their side, and he's just talking to them because he's interested in them. And this is an ongoing element where he takes an interest in whatever they have so he can sidle up to them and just know a little more about them. And in the process, they're going to reveal what they did. And he always does this. So I think that was a very good example of him doing that, where he's saying, hey, I need your medical expertise right now.
I also like the concept of Columbo pestering the doctor with all of his health issues. It's like, yeah, I got this boil in my ass. I think you could take a look at it, Spock. My wife's had this trouble, there. And so we've been going to this doctor to try and fix it. He's not doing a good job. What do you recommend, Doc? And that's just another way he pesters Leonard Nimoy.
He gets a free medical advice. I really do also like how Peter Falk uses the fact that he's 5'6", and he uses that by hunching further and kind of walking at an angle a little bit. It's just great because Leonard Nimoy is 6 foot even, and you watch this episode and you think he's 6'8" or something.
What about his eyes? What do you think about his eyes? Are they a little...
Not 6'8" eyes.
No.
No one who's 6'8" would have those eyes.
So now that we brought up Leonard Nimoy, I want to get into him a little bit. How did you guys feel how he did as the villain?
I thought he was great. I thought he was exactly what he was supposed to be. And I don't know if they cast him as the villain because of his Spock experience, but that would make sense.
Must have been quite the change in what people were seeing him as at the time, I would imagine, right?
It's still cold and
Yes,
calculated.
he's really
There's that.
the same
But
thing, only
Spock-
turned to
Spock
evil,
wasn't-
not neutrality.
I was going to say, Spock isn't evil, is he? Like, he's just...
No,
It's
but
illogical. That's his brain is illogical.
so in that way, very similar.
Yeah.
And I think that could have been what they saw in him. Oh, you can play a logical, kind of calculated character, but let's go ahead and turn the dial to evil a little bit. And it shines through when his character gets a little irritated.
Sure.
Leonard Nimoy is really good at having that poke through without dominating what he's saying. Because, I mean, he'll be really rude to Columbo, but he'll do it with an even tone.
I thought of it as, it's very believable. His demeanor as a doctor sounded like exactly what I would expect of a busy professional to be like. A lot of times he would dismiss anyone just very casually. I'm busy and I don't have time for you right now. And he did that a lot with Columbo, where he would kind of be like, excuse me for a moment.
Excuse me, I've got to immediately go make a phone call. Every time Peter Falk leaves his site, off goes Leonard Nimoy to make a phone call.
There was a scene where it's when Columbo first meets Mayfield. He says something like, Doc, I've got this problem. I woke up on the wrong side of the filth today. And no, he says, I don't like
how you're making him like an adult Oscar the Grouch.
It's a little too
I got tackled in the streets by a tumbleweed.
Hey, I live in that garbage can over there. So he says something like, I don't like being in hospitals. And Mayfield's, just the way he said, well, that's not a totally uncommon thing. it just felt like a doctor demeanor.
It totally did. He's
He
like
did
a
pull it off.
little socially strange. And, well, obviously, we know he's some sort of psychopath on top of
But a
that.
brilliant surgeon.
But a brilliant surgeon, one of the best.
Great researcher.
If he wants
Yeah.
to keep you alive, he could definitely save you. Like the problem would be if he's dissolving sutures, which he did in this particular instance, but only for his own. If he wanted to, he could have saved that old guy for a while, I'm sure. And we'll jump around a little bit here. I want to talk about the end for a second because every one of these does end in that way. Columbo does have to he has to set up some sort of almost theatrical event to prove the murderer's guilt. How did you feel about that end scene with the shove and the planting of the suture, and how did that all fit?
Well, I think the setup and the execution of the surgery and Leonard Nimoy taking the Heidemann back in for the surgery, it was all done perfectly well. Like, everything aligned. It looked good. It made sense to what the plot they've developed was. I thought everything was great right up to the actual reveal. And I hinted at this earlier when we discussed it, where Columbo says, the one thing we didn't check was me. And then he pulls out the wad of sutures and then boom, credits. It was jarring. I just remember thinking this felt abrupt.
That actually does. They ended on that sort of note a lot in the show, and that might have just been the style at the time, possibly. But I think they kind of feel like you already know enough information, so there's nothing else to see.
You don't need to see Dr. Mayfield get booked, I guess, in that certain sense.
What I did like was, because I've now watched 3 other episodes in addition to this, most of them, Columbo has his moment after he's revealed, hey, I caught you, with the criminal, and they chat, and the criminal's like, how'd you do that? And like they have camaraderie and everything. So it wouldn't work for this one because we've already established Columbo doesn't like him. He broke his temper.
This is maybe the worst relationship he has with any murderer in the entire series.
So I think it might have even been more jarring had I seen this episode not first, because of I'm used to seeing, Columbo have his moment with the villain.
Right, and if you had only seen that going into this, I had a little bit more background having watched a few of these before. I kind of knew. Also, there's some jarring cuts throughout the episodes, too, that I think are more of a 70s style.
Yeah, and that's where the cinematography doesn't age so well, those parts.
Yeah, but ultimately, it doesn't matter. What I liked about the reveal is there was a definite look on Dr. Mayfield's face of like, I am fucked. And that was his final comeuppance, and it was played off really, really well. I also like the simple physicality of him pulling a thing out of his own coat.
Yeah,
That's to prove his point. I just thought that was a really cool touch without having to be anything elaborate. The elaborate stuff has already happened along the way here, and it leads to a series of escalating murders, whether it be by sutures, tire iron, or eventually a morphine accident. And by the way, when we go into Harry's morphine vision or whatever,
that's one of those things that hasn't aged well.
Yeah.
They do stuff like that.
Well, I don't know. I personally, it makes me want to inject morphine into my butt or something.
I mean, look, I've had enough morphine over the days because you can take it in pill form. You don't have to inject it. I don't like to inject stuff, but I've never have injected anything, actually, come to think of it. I'll try anything once. Listeners, if you have some needle drugs out there, I'll do it once.
Say a quick reminder, we're sponsored by morphine.
Yes, I wish. Oh my God, this would all be worth it.
Somebody call up Mac. I know that's the medical supply company that our poor dearly departed Sharon was going to call to prove her point about
and she was definitely that was going to get to the bottom of it right away, which is, of course, why you smashed her head in.
Yeah.
In the gentlest way possible. All she did was drop her keys, and she seemed to be mostly intact.
And that's kind of what we do find out about Dr. Mayfield is he's all well and good until something interferes with his original plan.
He did think on his feet well. I will say that despite the fact that he had to improv quite a bit with his murder, he did well. He did well.
Yeah, he did.
He did, yeah.
He did think in his initial plan of how to set up Sharon as looking like, there's morphine strapped under her sink and all that. One thing he messed up here is very in character, and that he didn't think of, who is the person who I just murdered and what can I plant here? He thought, what is just a logical thing I could plant here to look like there might be malfeasance of some kind?
none of it worked with Columbo. Was the whole thing, as he
Nothing
knew,
can.
and he knew that none of it really added up, and that was why he just didn't buy any of it. So I do want to ask you guys that we've talked quite a bit about Dr. Mayfield's performance as a character and as the actual actor. Do you guys feel like Columbo suspected him pretty much immediately in this?
I do, and I think having now watched a handful of episodes, he gets it right immediately more often than not.
And sometimes I will tell you, he will tell them when he figures it out.
Oh, he does.
At the end, he'll say, "I knew it was you from the beginning," or whatever. And this one, it's not explicitly stated. So I just wondering if you guys got a hint on that. He always thought it was him from the second he met him, or what?
Just because he was so antagonistic with the clock thing, and because, again, I thought, it's something I could have done. I would have completely ignored that as a clue. But because he was like, no, this is a big deal. I'm going to focus in on this. I thought immediately, he's like, well, this is one of the prime suspects, so I'm going to lean this way with my brain and see where it comes. And then every little box starts getting ticked. So it just furthers his intense knowledge of, okay, this is it.
Now, the big thing with this one, and you have seen enough of these, Brian, to where you know, his big problem was he couldn't find the motive for a long time in this. And
Right.
what is Columbo on motive?
He's big on motive. He announces that in another episode.
Which is great because he's not big on anything else.
Yeah, he's not big.
That's
period.
Neither are Leonard Nimoy's eyes, but we're not getting into that. But yeah, that was the big thing with this one. And Dr. Mayfield himself kept saying over and over again, why would I have killed her? Which is not a thing you would normally ask somebody if you didn't kill somebody and they thought you might. You wouldn't say, but why would I kill her? You would just be like, I don't kill people. That's
just denying
not
it
a thing
outright,
I
yeah.
do.
And that's the thing Columbo had to figure out, essentially, is the motive wasn't to kill her. It was to kill Dr. Heidemann. And then from there, you can see why he would kill someone else. I really, I like how all of that worked.
Yeah. To start you on that one, Van, I do think that was sort of misleading because that's just not the typical relationship with Columbo and his villain. So that's interesting that you got to see that firsthand and then see how typically he's much more bumbling and much more agreeable until he has all the proof. But with him, he just threw it out there.
The points during this where I really thought Columbo knew for sure was the part where Marcia comes back with the information about Harry Alexander.
Oh, sure, that he put that name on her tongue.
The ending has the clock reveal, which makes me think that's when he was 90% sure. But then knowing that there's tampering going on in the case essentially was like the deal sealer in my mind for Columbo.
Now we've covered most of the basics of the episode. Do you guys have any stray observations about it? Like, for instance, I really do want to talk about that party and what exactly that was. What were they doing there? Was it a bunch of doctors that were just going to talk about how they're doctors and eating a strange buffet of fruit? I was not sure what that was. And any other things that struck you in the episode that were maybe culturally appropriate at the time and strange now? Anything that jumped out at you at all?
Well, one thing for me that I wanted to point out was this was an example of technology back in the day being something that if you didn't experience it, and say you're from a younger generation or you're just a younger person, you wouldn't necessarily understand what's going on. And what I say is they do two things. They do a lot of exposition over the phone, a lot of one-sided phone conversations, not just this episode.
Clearly filmed by just that one person at that time. Yeah, the other side wasn't even there.
There was no one there. They were just hitting the beats, pausing, so on and so forth. And the thing that led into was Leonard Nimoy spying on the nurse when she made the phone call, in that he just picked up the different phone on the same line.
Yeah.
I feel like younger people might not understand that you could even do that. Now, that's just me being a crotchety old man. But that's a technological thing that's a little dated.
Right, like I didn't pick up my cell phone and hear what you're saying on yours.
Exactly. So I think that could truly confuse a Gen Zer.
That shows up in another Columbo episode I watched.
Oh.
Not for Bootu Boys. It's still one of the separate ones since we've both been tearing them up since getting into a van. I really, really enjoyed pretty much everything about this episode, but the party scene was pretty amazing in that it exhibits a lot of what 1970s California has always been in my head to me, despite obviously not being alive in the 1970s or living in California.
Yeah, that part too.
I liked the food spread, which had a lot of like fish.
crab and shrimp.
Yeah, and fruits and
Fish and fruit.
it's in some sort of like
It's like ice cream and chocolate.
it's in some sort of house that seems like it only could have belonged in Los Angeles.
It's on a beachfront, and it's got like a patio, and you could very much see every single human being in the house because it's a
Yeah, you could just see the glass-sided house. Yeah,
There's also a great scene in this one where they're all out there partying, and that whole Hollywood sort of thing has the rolling hills or whatever. It looks like that backyard just went down into the abyss, and it feels like somebody fell, they would have just rolled into wherever. It's like it's such a different atmosphere environment than anything we've ever seen.
If you don't lose 2 party members at a party to rolling.
Oh, she rolled down the hill.
what kind of party was it?
Yeah, it's not a good party.
Leonard Nimoy here has a fetching outfit on too.
Oh, I've noticed that. Yeah, the
Very
weird
tight
sort
pants.
of like the slacks or whatever.
Checkered slacks or some sort of checkered pants and a big old comfy sweater.
He just calmly watches Columbo gorge while he's drinking his Long Island iced tea or whatever he had there.
And then he writes him a prescription for whatever the medicine he was, which I thought was interesting. I didn't really think about that, but I guess doctors can just do that.
Yeah, whatever they want.
Whatever, yeah. Off the
Around.
clock, it doesn't matter. Doctors are always working.
In their study where they're getting ready to make more phone calls once Columbo leaves.
The second he is out the door, he picks up the phone. Yeah.
I imagine all doctors have dealt with Columbo here and there.
Do you guys have any other thoughts at all that you want to throw in on here?
I will say that I am super pumped for the next episode.
I am too.
Yeah, this is only the beginning. This is just the intro. It's just a little appetizer, and we're gonna get into even more Columbo later on this week.
I have a stray thought I really thought.
Oh, good. Yeah, please do.
Which is the operating scenes. So early on in the show, Columbo decides, hey, I need to see how this works because he suspects something's going wrong with Dr. Mayfield, and this is how he's finding
But he has that issue with
what happened to Dr. Vitamin.
He gets a little queasy.
Yeah, he's queasy in hospitals and certainly can't watch an operation. He has to look away while trying to figure out how operations work. But the doctor that's with him is fucking fired up about it. He cannot get his eyes off it. He's just looking and looking and looking at this operation and gets visibly excited and then exclaims about a suture that was put into a colon. It's amazing.
Look at that job he did in that colon, something like that. Yeah.
But later, when Dr. Heidemann is being operated on by Dr. Mayfield, Columbo is intently watching the procedure being.
I think that was on purpose. I thought
Yeah. Oh no, it is on purpose. Yeah.
But no, I don't know. It could have just been an oversight as well.
No, there's no way. I definitely think that.
So, do you think that he overcame that because he knew he had to?
I assume that it's like when it comes to this really matters
When it's time to
or the other
put on
the
clamps or whatever. No, it's not, because he has something like that in many episodes where he's squeamish about things, and it's always comedic. Columbo's got so many quirks that a lot of times it holds him back from being able to do what he wishes he could, and that was this one, which it works for me. I always laugh every time.
I was wrong.
Every time. Oh, okay.
All right.
How can we both be wrong?
Very simple.
When there's really only one or the other options here.
No, very simple explanation of this. What happened in between Columbo watching that surgery and then watching the final surgery? He got the prescription from Leonard Nimoy. He had the medication, so his stomach wasn't queasy anymore. That's it.
Okay, that's fair. That's maybe in a way Dr. Mayfield helped him solve this crime on accident another way.
A couple people he didn't help along the way.
He didn't help poor Sharon or poor Harry Alexander.
Who was working in some playground with children.
Harry Alexander feeds goats for a living, and he will not compromise that job by talking to Columbo.
Columbo's wandering around at this petting zoo or whatever. It's like, I feel at home here.
I will give you
I'm
guys.
thinking about riding one of these bad boys home.
I will give you guys my straight thought on this, and we'll talk about it more in the next episode. But the way he interacts with Harry Alexander is very straightforward, right? Like he doesn't do any of his act with people like that. When he does not think that you kill somebody, he doesn't act the way he does the rest of the time.
He doesn't, and that's another clear sign that he's at least on to someone or thinks they have some level of involvement.
Right. If there's any possibility, and he's very good at knowing who really isn't a suspect but might provide information in other ways, and that's when he becomes very businesslike. It's just a matter of rattling off questions at that point and getting to the root of the matter. When it's somebody he thinks could have some involvement, he's just a whole other different thing, and we will get more into that on the next episode. So I think if you guys have gotten to everything you want to talk about, we'll just have to leave it there for now. And if if you guys want to talk about it more afterwards, we can stop the recording and then talk about it later.
I have one more thing for you here.
Just one more thing.
Yeah, you missed your chance there, didn't you?
So in the rundown, Spencer, you put a question that we didn't talk about. And
Yeah, it's because I didn't think it was necessary.
it isn't, but I want to touch on it. How did I feel about the murderer? I think you're asking.
Well, he's awful. We talked about that.
Well, you also, I didn't write it for
His eyes are too small.
You said something about, is there any redeeming value here? And there isn't.
No.
In this case, but every single other episode I watched.
There is.
All three.
There was. I totally agree with that entirely. Like,
No,
I
this
feel
guy is Dr. Mayfield's. He's fucking awful.
Yeah, he's just a sociopath just going through calculatedly murdering whoever he wants to along the way because the goal just remains, I need to get away with this thing.
Or Sharon and Harry. He just killed those people because they were not bad.
We also see that he's ruthlessly ambitious. He really wants more than anything credit for some sort of drug, I believe, that he and Heidemann are developing to help transplants go smoothly and not be rejected by the body. And it doesn't matter to him to save the lives. Obviously, he takes a whole lot of them throughout the course of this episode. It doesn't matter to him about that. He wants credit and he wants notoriety for what he's done, and just continues to have to murder people in order to potentially get that credit. Shows no signs of remorse, no regret, nothing.
He sees a goalpost, he sees something he wants, and
He sees murder.
he takes it. Yeah, exactly. He sees that murder, and he says, that's what I want. I'm going to bottle it. I'm going to sell it. It's mine.
I'm going to tape it under Sharon's sink.
Guys, go check your sinks when you get home. There might be some morphine under it.
Yeah, and if there is, you know that someone's dead.
And has Leonard Nimoy been in anyone's house recently? Because if so, that's a really good tip-off.
Not in a while. Honestly, he hasn't been talking to me for a few years now.
Wonder what's up.
Yeah, well, I made him mad at one of his dinner parties.
Oh, did you not eat the fish and the fruit?
Well, I would only eat the fish, but not the fruit. I had a sense that he had poisoned the fruit, and it was some sort of guise to get me under the knife.
And you insulted his sweater.
No, I did not. I said his sweater was
Well,
warm.
you only complimented his slacks. You didn't say anything about the sweater.
That's it.
I like the slacks better, to be fair, because they were just weird.
I think that's enough for this go-around, but we are not done. We are going to come back later in the week, and we're going to talk about another Columbo episode. We're all very excited. It's probably consensus top 5 episode for every fan. So we're going to get into that, and it's going to be a lot of fun. It is Season 3, Episode 2, Any Old Port in a Storm. We'll be doing that next time. For now, though, we're going to leave things here.
I found, by the way, that episode to be a very pleasant experience.
Oh, well,
Wow, that was well done.
low-hanging fruit right there for sure. Thank you guys for listening. We will be back with you later in the week.